Thank you everyone for coming. We're going to give the candidates 1 minute to introduce themselves, just if you haven't been here yet. I am chair of the Columbia Elections Board. My name is Jeremy Meyers. This is Abby Abrams. She's the editor-in-chief of Spectator.
Abrams, yeah.
Abrams, what did I say?
Abrams is fine.
Oh, sorry. Abrams. Both of our last names are plural. It's very important. Yeah, we have 5 candidates here for CCSC University Senate. And we're going to try to wrap this debate up in the next 40 minutes. And so first we'd like to give you each a minute to introduce yourselves, talk about your platforms. So we'll start with Ramis.
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Ramis Wadood. As you know, I'm running for University Senator. I'm a sophomore studying political science and anthropology. For the last 2 years, I've been CCSC Class of 2016 president, through which I worked on things like housing and dining reform, the honor code, job deadline extension, and also through groups like the Coalition Against Sexual Violence and the Mental Health Task Force. And I'm also currently on the University Senate as a Student Affairs Committee staffer. I've worked on things like the Quality of Life Report and academic policy reform, specifically our cross-registration systems. So I think that my work over the last 2 years has showed that I'm committed to creating lasting change at this university and making our university experience better. And I want to make it even better, working on things like mental health services reform, providing more academic resources to Columbia College students, making better our open course registration system, or open course evaluation system, I apologize. Expanding hours at Avery, NOCO, the top 2 floors of Butler.
10 seconds.
And also improving our technology infrastructure and joining you guys in a space discussion about our move to Manhattan bill. And I hope to expand on those topics more during this debate. Thank you for your time so much, and hopefully you'll vote for me. Thank you so much.
Time, Connor. Jacob.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jacob Johnson, and I believe that there are several misconceptions about the University Senate. Only 22% of senators are students. The Senate is not so much a governing body as a service organization, and trustees can veto the decisions of the University Senate. Yet if I'm elected, I will hit the ground running, and I will have the strong voice, the initiative, and the passion to represent the student voice as strongly as possible. I have a very substantive platform with very unique ideas, like creating shorter, more specific, more frequently offered quality of life surveys that would increase student responses. And I would also like to create a Senate rule that requires the Senate to vote on any measure that receives a very strong, one-sided response from students in the frequent surveys that I would send out. I'm also the only freshman running, and we already have a sophomore, a junior, and an outgoing senior senator, but I believe that we need a senator from the class of 2017. Yet I'm also a very experienced candidate, as I've already run for this office last fall in the special election. And I also believe that being a freshman would allow me the potential for re-election, which would actually be a good thing because it would keep me accountable to the people. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want a fierce advocate for the student voice in the Senate, I hope you'll consider my candidacy. Thank you.
Michael.
Hi, my name is MacKay. I'm a junior majoring in classics at the college. On campus, I've coordinated the visiting student program, worked with community impact, and I've also sung a cappella with the Kingsmen. My platform focuses on innovating Columbia to cultivate community. I'm the only candidate with a concerted effort for improving our technological systems. I think far too often during these U Senate debates, we hear kind of these platitudinous catch-all concepts. I'm hoping to give you a very specific frame of mind, which I am looking to apply to the Senate, because I really think that technology will be the most important thing that the Senate can do next year, and I'd like to start that dialogue and that process immediately. Thanks.
Ben.
Great. My name is Daniel Liss, and I am a sophomore running for University Senate. This year on CCSC, I created software that matched hundreds of students with alumni mentors. I authored legislation that allows students to vote for candidates without parties, and I created gradesatcu.com, a website that allows students to see the curves for classes before they register.
30 seconds.
This year, I'm running for Senate to continue the tradition of hard work for students. I'd like to work on career placement, improving career placement at Columbia, increasing access to alumni, and making this campus that works. Career placement, that involves increasing internships that only go to Columbia students and improving funding applications.
It's time.
Thanks so much, guys.
Hi, my name is Daniel Stone. I'm a sophomore in Columbia College, and I'm an editor and writer for both the Blue and White and the Columbia Lion. And for the past 2 years, I've had the chance to really learn the ins and outs of this sort of mysterious university institution known as the University Senate. A lot of things I've seen I like, a lot of things I've seen I don't like. That's why I'm running. But one thing I've really come to appreciate is that the University Senate is the one way in this university that students' concerns can be heard at the top. And the first promise I want to make is the only one I can make because it's a slow-moving body. And that's that I promise to be an advocate for the interests of Columbia College students. I want to bring their concerns to the highest level possible in this university. And my platform stems from this. I have a very realistic proposal of creating a student trustee, making meetings that pertain to Columbia College students open, whereas now they're closed, and ensuring that college senators report back to their constituents, which they don't currently do.
Great. So our first question after that is going to be, tell us how your experience on campus makes you the most likely to get things done in the Senate, which we all know can be kind of a slow-moving body, and how do you expect to realize the things that you've set out in your platform? So we'll start with Daniel and go back this way.
Well, my first experience with the University Senate really started last spring when I interviewed Richard Son, who's an outgoing University Senator, and I sort of got a sense of what one can do in the University Senate if one doesn't want to do a lot, and that's when one wants to work on a lot of surveys. And now this year I've gone to a lot of plenary meetings, and I've seen that I really come to appreciate the University Senate as an institution where a lot gets achieved in small committees, where people deliberate throughout the year. And I think that as a University Senator, one needs to really appreciate the value of meeting committees, but also I think that one needs to start to challenge the status quo that's currently set by Sharon O'Haller in the University Senate, where they don't let people discuss much of substance during Senate plenary discussions. Because that's not the spirit of the University Senate as an institution.
10 seconds.
Daniel.
Oh, perfect. So my platform has to do with career placement, alumni, and a campus that works. In terms of career placement, these are issues that I've already been working on as the Alumni Affairs representative. I have been helping to increase the number of internships that go directly to Columbia students by reaching out to alumni for these opportunities. In terms of alumni, I created a form that allows student groups to request alumni at their events. I created software for mentorship, and one of my big platform points is to unlock the alumni directory, and I've already been working in conversations with the alumni office. And then in terms of making the campus work, I've also been involved in a larger variety of projects, just from improving the toilet paper at Columbia.
Michael.
So on campus, I've been involved with a range of student groups and activities, including the Kingsman and some more community service related. I coordinate an after-school program that deals with classics and instructs why classics is cool, more or less, to young students, middle school and elementary school in the area. I think what makes me an ideal candidate is that I want to bring a new comprehensive strategy to the Senate. We're under the impression, at least I am, that when we send out these quality of life surveys or kind of pursue these tried and tested paths that don't really achieve much, that if we have a new voice pursuing it, it'll somehow change. We only have about 35% participation in student council elections, which I think warrants a new direction. I'm coming to this election as a visiting student from Oxford. I dearly care about this school. I want to bring a new change and a new direction for this place that I love and I want to protect.
Jacob.
One of the things that I learned about running last semester is that there's actually a relatively small impact that one student senator can make in a body of 108 senators. Yet I think that if we're to have any impact, we need to have a clear vision for what we're going to do in the University Senate, and we need to have a realistic understanding of the ways that we can create change through coalition building and through committees. And I think that I provide the experience and the knowledge of the University Senate through running previously and through all of my research, through various resources, that I have an understanding of the
30
University Senate, yet I combine that with the freshness of a freshman who can bring forth new ideas, new creative ideas, and who can have a strong voice and the initiative to actually implement those ideas through very firm policies like creating a Senate rule that requires the Senate to vote on things that receive really strong responses in student surveys and creating those shorter, more specific surveys to really reflect student opinions. So I will work within the system to create more student support where it can be done. And that's one of the lessons, a very valuable lesson that I learned from running last semester.
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a staffer on the Student Affairs Committee of the Senate, and I'm also working directly with Professor Sharon O'Halloran, who is the chair of the Executive Committee of the Senate, as her research assistant, working on her with on things like online education. So I think that during my time on the Senate, I've realized that senators have a very steep learning curve because you have to get used to this new bureaucracy, the legislative process, the senators from various schools, not only students but administrators, faculty, alumni, librarians, research staff. So I've realized that it takes a while to get used to the position, and because I've spent a year on the Senate, I have that experience, and because I know who's on the Senate, I know how the process works, I have the room to be innovative, I have the room to pass new reforms and kind of shake the foundations of the Senate. Also, in my role as Class of 2016 President, I communicate directly with students, and I plan on taking that tradition of communicating with as many students as possible to the Senate, enacting lasting reform, because I am the only candidate with experience in how the Senate works, and I plan on using that experience to make lasting policy.
And that's time. So we'd like to give you each another minute to talk about the quality of life survey. All of you have mentioned that in your platforms about changing it or improving it or somehow using the data in a new way. So we'd like to give you a minute to talk about quality of life. And we'll start with Ramis.
We should start with Jacob so that different people get to start.
Okay, we'll start with Jacob.
Okay, absolutely. I believe that I have the most substantive platform regarding the quality of life survey. All of the candidates here want to have the results of the quality of life survey released more concretely, more transparently to the student body. For example, Daniel Liss wants to have the data released more steadily and make it more available to students. I believe that that's absolutely something that we should do, but I don't believe that's enough. I believe that we need to have that Senate rule that requires the Senate body to vote on anything that receives a really strong response from questions in the quality of life survey. And I would create shorter, more specific, more frequently offered quality of life surveys that would allow the student response to be higher, because the last quality of life survey was 90 questions, and because of that, a lot of people didn't answer it. If we have shorter surveys, more people will answer them, we'll have a stronger student response, and because of my Senate rule, the Senate will have to vote on measures that receive really strong support from the quality of life survey. And finally, because the nature of my questions and the surveys would be very specific, it would be tailored towards the Senate directly responding to the responses in the student surveys. If we just have generic questions about safety, for instance, then it'll be harder for the Senate to react to those policies, but it'll be specific questions that will allow reaction.
Michael.
Again, the big problem underlying the quality of life survey is going to be apathy, or voter apathy, I think, in general. If you have an important debate on something at the University Senate right now, and we can only fill a room like this to half capacity, I think it's a bit unwise to put too much emphasis on quality of life survey. Personally, I think it's a sunk cost at this point. We can continue the program, but I wouldn't advise that approach to the Senate, which we've been pushing, where it's basically trying to do too much with too little of a framework and too little of an engagement with the student body. We need to start from the bottom and build up. We can't go from the top and go down.
Daniel.
I think that the quality of life survey was an important initiative. It also sucked a lot of oxygen out of the Senate. I think one of the reasons that we saw initiatives such as fossil fuel divestment, issues such as fossil fuel divestment and sexual assault policy need to come up outside of the Senate is because the Senate wasn't working on issues that were most relevant to students. In the future, I'd like to see the Senate and the Student Affairs Committee in particular working on a wider portfolio of projects that hit students where they care about it and get students to want to be involved in the legislation that the Senate is working on.
Great, Daniel.
I agree with Daniel. As of now, I've sat through about 5 presentations about the quality of life survey, and I have to say, I really think that it's been a big waste of time. It's been the primary project for undergraduate senators for the past 3 years, and I think it might really look good on consulting interviews, but I don't think it really looks good for Columbia College students. And I think the results are coming out tonight, and you're going to see that it says really nothing other than the obvious. And the many hundreds of hours that were spent by Senate staffers, by Columbia College senators working on this project might have better been spent actually talking to Columbia College students, working on projects that benefit them. And instead, what we've got is this collection of data that answers the impossible question of what actually matters at Columbia and rates it on this really arbitrary scale of -3 to 3. And I think that's good maybe if you're a corporation, but that's not Columbia. We're in a university.
Or not.
Great. Okay, so the next question.
Ramis.
So sorry.
It's okay, don't worry. So my thoughts on the quality of life survey. I'm actually the only candidate running who has worked on the quality of life survey directly. I've been working on it all year. I've worked on it since the beginning of the data analysis process, and I've analyzed most of the data, looked through most of the data, and written a lot of the full report. Like Daniel said, should be released tonight and publicized tomorrow. So because of my experience with the Quality of Life Board, I've realized that although there have been countless hours that I've spent on it, sleepless nights that I've worked on it, every hour that I worked on it was fulfilling because I realized that the Quality of Life Survey has the potential to be one of the most powerful tools for student advocacy. Obviously, it doesn't say everything about students. It doesn't quantify our experience at this university, but it is a tool that students can go to and use to back up their policy initiatives, to back up their student activism. Administrators like to see data,
10 seconds.
as what I've realized, and if student activists, student leaders go to administrators and say, this is a concern we have, and look at the quality of life data, that corroborates this need for policy change, I think we can effectively pass policy change with that.
Okay, so the next question is about sexual assault and Title IX reforms. We're going to start with Michael, but the question is, which reforms do you see as the top priority, and how do you see yourself pushing to make those actually happen and to make progress happen?
Yeah, I approve with most of CU Dem's petition on the matter. Again, where my objective as senator is to really promote this idea of tangible activism through projects. I really think that NSOP week is where we should be coordinating much of our efforts. We're creating a consent to sexy kind of staggered approach throughout the year where you can have a better, more well-funded, perhaps more highly regarded dialogue on campus that continues throughout freshman year, because it shouldn't be a one-stop shop for sexual assault. We need to create a safe atmosphere on campus, and for me, I want that project before I want to go down the road of the policy-making debates that take so many years and so much time out of the Senate.
Go ahead.
One of the issues that I've seen, I've been involved in a lot, or affected by the most, is the Title IX reporting for RAs. I think it's a real issue when you have the students who are on the front lines with residents in dorms who have restrictions placed on how they can interact with students and get the best resources and care for students. So definitely, I think that I want to work on that aspect. There's also an upcoming vote on the number of members in PACSA to have the most effective legislating within
10 seconds.
the Senate, and I'd also be interested to work on those issues.
Daniel.
Hi. What I really think is that we need to make sure that the campus debate about this continues and that student group input is solicited as much as possible. Because what we've seen currently is that it's taken the administration a New York Times article to get them even to hold a town hall 5 months after students called for it. And I think that's outrageous. And as the college senator, you have the duty to make noise about this and to make sure that they hold more public forums and make sure that ministers have to keep looking students in the eye when it comes to this. Because I think no matter what my opinions are, that's what really matters. And that's how you can really leverage this position to keep this policy going. When they came up with the current policy, student groups of input was constantly solicited, and it was done publicly and in wide public forums, and currently that's not being done enough.
Ramis.
Okay, so I think once again I'm the only candidate running who has been directly involved in the sexual assault initiative. Since the beginning of the year, I've been in talks with the CU Dems and the University Senate about the Sexual Assault Initiative. I'm an active member of the Coalition Against Sexual Violence, and I think that the two priorities that we should focus on are in the set of policy recommendations that the coalition made, and include bettering our consent education, like Michael said. I think we should focus on NSOP and change the culture from the very beginning of sexual assault on campus. And also I want to focus on the sexual assault adjudication process. I think that's one of the larger reasons that the Sexual Assault Initiative began, and I want to make sure that's as fair, as open, and as accessible as possible to students, and I want to make sure that the complainants and the respondents in that system are treated fairly, are given the resources they need.
10 seconds.
And I think that because I've been involved in the process from the beginning, I'm the best advocate for that change, and I'm the best senator that can actually enact that policy change in the Senate.
I think that the issue of transparency about sexual assault on campus is a very good example of my clear vision and of my concrete platform. I believe that we should not only revise NSOP consent education, as Michael mentioned, but I believe that it should not only be during NSOP either, because a lot of things happen during NSOP, a lot of things fly over your head, and you can't remember everything that goes on during NSOP. These training sessions need to continue throughout freshman year, every month, so that students will really remember consent education, and it will not just be something that happened during NSOP. It really needs to stick into students' heads. We also need to revise and improve staffing and training programs in the Rape Crisis and Anti-Violence Sports Center, and that center needs to be moved to a more central location so that students can all fully utilize it when they're having a lot of issues. And we also need to support Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April, because that's a very important reminder of students being responsible on campus. I also believe that my platform of the Senate rule to be responsive to student interests will be critical, because students overwhelmingly support transparency about sexual assault, and I would make sure that the Senate had to vote on that measure through my Senate rule. Thanks.
For information, are we allowed to respond to things, or?
We'll give you some time at the end of our questioning to get
Wrap
closing
up.
statements, and you'll have.
And then there'll be audience questions as well.
Okay.
Right. So our next question is about open course evaluations. So what do you think about open course evaluations, and if you support them, how would you go about making them a reality? And we'll start with Daniel Liss.
Oh, great. I'm in strong support. I've already been working with ADI talking about the course filter and with Culpa and how to integrate the course evaluations we already have with the grading information that we now have and are about to have more of. It's a very difficult issue to legislate, to have all the departments making their course evaluations public. I think the first tangible steps that we can take is to, with the departments that are most excited to participate, such as the computer science office,
10 seconds.
to have them show that this is something that students appreciate, and that actually drives more students to courses, and that really benefits the departments.
Daniel.
Okay. Well, I think that open course evaluations are important, but I don't necessarily think there should be a Senate priority. And I think there's also some sort of philosophical objection that one should understand, that perhaps education is not a seller's market when it comes to students, and there perhaps there are reasons why course evaluations have not been open for a very long time. And they used to be open, but perhaps maybe we don't need to initiate that. I think the CULPA is really good, and there's things to be said for not making the university play part in this sort of utilitarian view of education, where people shop courses based on what grades they can get. I think it's a little anti-intellectual on some very basic level.
Ramis.
So I definitely I like the open course evaluation system. I think that Daniel, we're friends, but I'm going to disagree with you. I think the first step that we need to take is to better administer the system so that it doesn't fall apart. I think that because it's new, it's just being rolled out over the last couple of years. What we need to do first is to ensure that the open course evaluation system, or the evaluation forms, are sent to you after finals week. So not only are you not inundated with evaluation emails during finals week, but you can actually reflect on those finals in the evaluation form. And I do think that if administered properly, this can be a very successful initiative for the future. Obviously, it should be the top priority of the Senate. the Senate can work on a lot more substantive and more important issues. But open course evaluations is a great initiative that, if administered properly, can be very beneficial to the student body. And we should ensure that open course evaluations are more anonymized. I've heard a lot of complaints from students that professors have confronted students after they submitted their course evaluations. We should ensure that the information from course evaluations are disseminated to the public, because that's the whole purpose for those
Times. Jacob.
I have a concrete, clear vision to formalize the open course evaluation process to make open course evaluations readily available to students so that students can see all of the ratings of their professors and all the comments about their professors. Obviously this would be anonymous, but I do not believe that COPA is enough. Dan, I believe that COPA is great, but I believe that it creates a huge voluntary bias, because only people who have a very strong opinion of a professor are going to go on to COPA. By having these evaluations sent out to everybody, there's less of a voluntary bias. It creates a lot better understanding of our professors. And I don't believe that it's anti-intellectual, because I believe that the professor that you have in a course, it can be just as important or more important than the course you're actually taking, because the professor can really make that class really, really good for you, as it has done for me in many courses. I also say to Ramis and Daniel Liss, I think it's great that you have a lot of experience dealing with these issues. I highly respect you for that. But I also think, as Jared Odesky said in the Spectator article after the last debate, it's important also to have a fresh perspective in the Senate. And I believe that I bring that fresh perspective while still having a very clear understanding of the Senate issues and about how the Senate works.
That's time. Great. So now we're going to give you each a minute to wrap up. Sorry.
Yeah, I think with open course evaluations, we need to be very specific with how we approach them, so that we're more measuring the efficacy of the professor and, let's say, how they may or may not be atomizing their learning with either online components like Piazza in the computer science department or whatnot. I think what will push this endeavor to becoming more intellectual is if we start to attribute grade percentages. Personally, I think that broaching the field of A-range grades is not something that we should be pursuing at Columbia, and I think that the professor's work is not, it's not something that it's not a brand of clothes, it's not something we shop, it's something that we appreciate individually, and it can't be reduced to a single letter. That's it.
Great, we'd like to give you another minute to wrap up with closing statements.
Or respond to people if you have.
Or give responses, so we'll start with Daniel Stone.
Okay. Well, I think that in the end, I really want to stress the fact that I want to be an advocate for students in the role of as university senator. And I think that to be realistic, one needs to really view themselves mainly as an advocate of students, because that's all really one can promise. But beyond that, I really want to make sure that students' concerns are heard at all levels of the university, and through that, I really want to institutionalize the idea of having a student trustee, something that's reality at 70% of public universities in this country, 20% independent schools. And beyond that, I really want to make sure that what the Senate talks about is open to the student body. It's ridiculous that they've been discussing free speech in secret, and I had to uncover that and bug administrators for that even to come to public light. I think it's also ridiculous that our current university senators aren't telling students really what they're doing with regularity. They need to have some sort of system of regular accountability. And I think that there are a lot of issues that people have talked about that really need to be dealt with on a school level and aren't really Senate issues at all.
Great, Ramis.
So I've told you about my experience in the past. I think that with that experience, just to counter what Jacob said about the fresh perspective, I think that experience is necessary in the Senate. Like I said, there's a steep learning curve. You have to learn the tricks of the trade. And with that experience, I think that I have the room to be innovative, a room to bring a fresh perspective. From day one on the Senate staff, I've brought new perspectives to the Senate. I've always pushed back on things I didn't agree with regarding the quality of life survey, releasing data. And I think that with that experience, I can really push innovative policies like mental health services reform and other things that aren't on the Senate's radar. And during my role as Class of 2016 president, I have a proven track record of being an advocate for students and communicating directly with students, asking them for feedback for every single policy change I do, providing event reviews, exposing the amount of money we use for each event. And I think that I want to take that experience, take that tradition of communicating with students and being an advocate to the Senate and being the best advocate I can be.
To respond to Ramis, I do have a very clear understanding of the issues that affect the Senate, but I just haven't worked on some of these issues like the quality of life survey, like Ramis says. And I totally respect what you've done, and Mark Heinrich in the last election campaign partly on having done some of these things as a Senate staffer. I totally respect that, but I think the fact that I have a clear understanding of them, but at the same time I haven't necessarily worked on them, gives me a fresh perspective to create novel ideas since I haven't become institutionalized in the system of what the Senate is already doing on these issues. I believe I can steer the change in the system. At the same time, though, Michael talked about comprehensively changing the way the Senate works. I don't believe that that's really a reality, given that only 22% of senators are students, and there's not really an ability for students to create a drastic change. But I believe that I have the clear vision and the concrete ideas to create what I can within the Senate system by creating, as I said, things like a Senate rule that would really require the Senate to be responsive to students. I think that we need to have a clear understanding of what the Senate actually does and can do, and have concrete ideas and the implementation power to actually create positive change in the Senate.
Okay, I'll quickly go. I'll just quickly say that I disagree with Ramis. I don't think that experience is a requisite for positive leadership. I think motivation is. I've attended Senate meetings, and I have read all the minutes for the committee I'm looking to join. I'll disagree with Jacob because you can drive drastic reform if you address a committee specifically. I'm looking to join the Committee on Information and Technology when Jared hopefully moves to the Executive Committee. I think that my ideas that are basically concerned with technology, such as Lion's Den, which fosters on-campus startups, virtual office hours, which can incorporate more online guidance into classrooms, and Letters Lumine, if you will, which will shine your light by creating a system of interdepartmental letters that we can really understand what our major family is. Because in a large university like Columbia, you can get lost, but I want to work from the bottom up with technology, because I think that can be the panacea for a lot of the problems on campus, and that will at least be the starting point for them.
Just to summarize, I guess, I've worked very hard on the council this year. I've been working to a way for alumni to distribute frequent flyer miles to students, an event series that was having events every other week for the past few months for students to meet alumni in all different fields. Mentorship, of course, the election reforms, grades at CU, the forum so that student groups could request alumni at their events, a partnership with the young alumni so that more students are going to alumni events, more alumni are going to student events, co-launching the Student Ambassador Program with more than 30 students and thousands of dollars working on alumni affairs issues on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. Planning a forum so that students could talk to the alumni who most directly guide the dean. And I'd really just like to continue working very hard for students on the Senate.
Great. Yeah, we started today.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great, so we'd like to open it up for the audience to ask questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and please take up to 30 seconds to ask a question. What about from the senators in the back?
Oh, Peter.
Oh, Peter.
Hey, sorry. I just had a question specifically for Jake. You mentioned that you want to institute a rule in the Senate that requires a vote on initiatives brought up by the students. Can you explain how you would make that a reality?
Absolutely. So I would work through the Rules Committee of the University Senate to create a Senate rule that initiatives or student survey responses that receive over 80% response to one side, that are very one-sided to over 80%, and that have a very high turnout, must be voted on by the Senate. That doesn't mean that the Senate has to agree with what the students end up deciding. That means the Senate must at least consider this motion and must vote on it. With the fossil fuel divestment, it received overwhelming support from the student body, 75%, yet the Senate has failed to take action on divestment. With my Senate rule through the Rules Committee, the Senate would have already had to vote on fossil fuel divestment and at least take a stand on fossil fuel divestment, because the Senate needs to be more responsive to students, given that only 22% of senators are students. But that over 80% threshold in a student survey towards one side or the other would be crucial towards forcing the University Senate to at least take some sort of action or consider some sort of action.
Any other questions?
David.
So a few candidates have mentioned apathy, the low voter turnout, some features that perhaps suggest that there's some democratic failures going on. Given that, and given the fact that senators serve for 2-year terms, making them pretty much unaccountable, there are no, i.e. there are no institutional features that mandate accountability. What would you do specifically to ensure democratic accountability, given that most people aren't vested currently in the system? And or do you think that that's important? Do you think that it is in fact important to represent people who are not participating in the system?
Great, thank you. So we'll each have 30 seconds to answer. We're going to start with Ramis, and then we'll just go down the line.
Great. So I definitely agree with you that the 2-year term does cause for some democratic deficiencies. It's hard to hold senators accountable, but I think it can be made easier by effectively utilizing channels of communication like social media, emails, face-to-face conversations. Like I said, as class president, I have a track record of communicating directly with
10
students.
seconds.
And I think that using Facebook, Twitter, emails to not only update students, but communicate with them, hear their feedback, let them hold us
That's
accountable would be best for the Senate.
David, I think that's a really good question. I really like your question. I'm the only candidate here who would not be a lame duck on day one. None of these other candidates would have the potential to run for re-election because their term would run out when they're seniors. For me, I would have the possibility of re-election. I'm not saying whether I would run for re-election or not, but that would hold me accountable to the people, the possibility of re-election. Also, my Senate rule that requires the Senate to vote on student responses that receive strong support would create a tremendous amount of accountability and transparency. Ramis, increased media is a great thing, but we need something stronger than that.
Time.
On nature, as far as accountability goes, I think it's important to look at what position the candidate is in. So I'm a junior. Most of my curricular requirements are finished with, aside from art humanities, music humanities, and the thesis. So that's on nature. On a matter of methods, I would say an approach to the Senate. I'm trying to approach the Senate by committee. It's hard to institute a way of, I guess, checking in to make sure everyone's doing their work, but if you can vote on a method of how people are going to attack their work, that's important, because it can't just be conceptual, it has to be specific.
So in other words, no actual connection with the student body.
Okay, we're going
Do
to
you wanna just
start
finish
move
that?
on in the
We're gonna
interest of
move on
time,
to Daniel
but
Liss.
you're welcome to talk to him afterward.
So I think one of the reasons why we've seen so much voter apathy is because we haven't been working on the issues that most directly impact students. I think one very strong way to make sure that we're doing that is by getting a lot of the ideas from projects that student groups are working on. EcoReps is working on greener lab initiatives. Work on that. Bike shares. Work on that. Sexual assault. Work on that. And
That's time.
I think that'll help.
Okay, well, I think it's unfair to expect students to actually care. We're in a country, there's a financial crisis going on. People want to get jobs and stuff. That's important. But that said, I think as university senator, you need to go out there and you need to be in student press. You need to be right with students about what's going on in the Senate if it's something the students should care about. So if they're talking about free speech, you should write about that in the Spectator. You owe it to your constituency to at least make it possible for them to know what's going on in the Senate.
Okay, great. That concludes the debate. Thank you all for coming. We'll be doing the 2015 Class Council debate now.